What's good, guys? So I'm going to be breaking down a really energetic, fun, uplifting sample. This sample honestly is super melodic and goes into a full Jersey club beat section and just has so many rhythmic elements that create this drive and push in the sample. Now I'm going to break down all the different plugins, VSTs, instruments, and effects that I've used in this so that you can learn and integrate these tips and insights into your own projects. Now, if you don't know me, my name's Blue. I'm a producer and sample maker. I've been doing this for years and I create loads and loads of sounds and samples like this. Now, if you'd like to work with me one-on-one and improve your music production and take you from where you're at now and overcome whatever struggles you have, whether it's mixing, mastering, composition, etc., we can do that. Just book a free call down below. It's half an hour where we discuss your goals and see how I can help improve your music production. And without further ado, this is the intro. And it really started with this melodic progression that I'd originally written on a piano, but I transferred it over to these multi-keys. This was a sound from Analog Lab. It's a preset called Cade and Jordan. This is by Key Major and his Onyx V2 bank. Awesome bank. And basically it just sounded like this. So it's a super lush and textured sound, and if you don't know, multi-keys basically cycles through different sounds. So if you press one key 4 times, it will play 4 different sounds before it cycles back again. Sometimes it's 3 sounds, 5 sounds, but oftentimes it's 4, and this helps create really cool textured melodies. So definitely check out multi-key banks. There's a lot of great ones for Analog Lab if you have this VST, and I just had a bunch of reverb and halftime, and I bounced that out and basically ended up reversing it so that I got this. And you're getting that chop effect from this 4th shape pan preset in Portal. And so the next layer I have is actually this bass, which was a one-shot. This is from Logan P. I'm not even trying to say the surname, but it's an awesome bass preset. Basically, this was just the audio file, and then I'd put it into a sampler and played it on my MIDI keyboard for the second half. So it's a weird kind of combination of the same 2 sounds. These are the same one-shots, but both these basses together basically just played this. And a fade. I just love this melody. The progression just sounds so uplifting. And weirdly, even though these are both the same one shot, I kept these in a different audio file and basically did this reverse here as well. And that's where you get this fade. Just a cool little effect. And also throughout this sample, I have this vinyl ambience playing. So it just helps add some depth. And then I've got these 2 different leads, which this one I combined 2 different presets from within Analog Lab, and I got this. So this is essentially following the bass, and then I've just coupled it with this preset, the Chick C synth lead from Mini V by Arturia. It's an awesome analog remake into VST, flushed it out with a bunch of reverb delay. Like, I mean, there's a lot of reverb on this with a big reverb delay, and just cutting out a lot of the lows, some of the highs, and so they just couple really nicely together. And so that came from me just having that bass line and then just playing on my MIDI keyboard. And I love just jamming with leads, having a bunch of reverb on a nice lead and then just jamming over something like a bass line is just how I feel like I get some of my best melodic ideas. Obviously, I'll tweak and pencil bits in, but there's just something really organic about playing it yourself. There's a lot more novelty. And of course, it can be difficult if you don't know how to play keys. I'm not by any means a professional pianist. I've learned over time from just jamming over my own projects and tracks how to play in all the different scales and sort of what notes make sense with each other. So even if you've just got something like a small MIDI keyboard like this Akai, and just learning how to jam in a scale will be super, super impactful on your compositions. And so then we have this awesome synth layer, which I got from Splice, and I just sound shifted it down 4 to match the project, adding some of this flanger and a bunch of reverb, and this just made it sound more airy and wide, and then also cutting out a lot of lows, a lot of highs, and then you'll hear this layer in the next section, but just in a different way. So this is what it sounded like. And if you can hear, there's also a drum rhythm to it, which really adds to this. So if I take off the EQ, so just a really cool sound. So having something arpeggiated like that, where there's that, you know, like almost like 16th note rhythm, it just adds a lot of rhythmic drive to the section, and just cutting out a lot of those highs in the intro just helps keep it a bit more subdued, because we're about to build into sort of a chorus section. So speaking of going into the next section now, this is what it sounds like. So a few new elements here. I love this section. This is where a lot of the build-up is happening. So we've got the same multi-keys that are reversed, but we've just changed the EQ on this. So compared to, so similar to what you're about to hear on that crazy synth layer, I'm also just opening up the EQ, letting more of that high end in once it opens into the next section. And so really one of the main elements now which carries on throughout a lot of this sample are the drums. It's this Jersey club sort of groove, and I've done a fair bit of processing on it, but without any processing it sounded like this. Lots of cool little textures layered in it as well, and then with my processing, so pretty similar, but more low-end focus. There's a lot more body, and that's really because firstly I pitched it down only 1 semitone, but then adding this halftime just gives it more body, and although I've lowered the mix slightly, it's still slightly giving it this halftime like drag. And then I've got this P821 MDN tape, so it's a really cool tape effect that gives it a bit more grit and distortion and just like low-end focus. And then I've also got a multi-band compressor boosting where that kick is so it really punches through, and then I'm just ducking slightly where some of the other melodic components are, so I'm creating clarity in the mix. Boosting some of the highs, but I've got it on the expand setting, so this is widening that compression in the high end. And I've got a bit of EQ, just ducking a few points again where there's other melodic components, just creating some space and just cutting out a little bit of the lows as well. And then I'm using this bass synergy preset. This is by Venexi, it's his Carbon Bank, and it just sounded like this. You'll notice that I have these gaps here, and often if you're writing a bass or a melody or anything, it's really helpful and impactful to have these little gaps and spaces where you just let the listener breathe. And it also sounds more realistic, because oftentimes someone playing an instrument hasn't got a note constantly playing. There's usually some spaces where there's a switch, or they let go of a note to play a different note, so you get these more realistic spaces. And again, it just gives the listener room to breathe. So I've also coupled this hi-hat layer with a halftime effect, and there's an EQ cutting out most of the lows, some reverb. This layer is about to sound way different in the next section, but this is what it sounded like layered with the drums. So if you're trying to build and crescendo your sections, which usually producers want to do because we're creating anticipation and we're taking the listener on a journey, it's going somewhere, usually just adding one layer at a time is what's going to help you do that. And in terms of rhythm, just if you've already got a main drum beat, or something like I had with the Jersey kick drum just going, then just layering some hi-hats or something as it builds is just going to create that rhythmic drive and kind of take the listener on a bit of a journey. Speaking of rhythm, I also just have this little fill here, which layered quite differently with a lot of previous layers I had when I was experimenting and trying to figure this section out, but this is one that's just stuck because I just thought it was a cool little unexpected, rhythmic element. And this is just taken from that same loop, but then I've put it on a separate track and pitched it down. So often, instead of doing a bunch of automation, I like to just copy and paste the sound, put it on a different track with a different effect. And in this case, it was pretty much just lowering the pitch. Now here as well, I've got this vocal, and I absolutely love this vocal. It added such a nice melody on top. And this is from Splice, and all I did was added a bunch of compression, reverb, pitched it down to match the project. I even added a bit of distortion, this American Plexi amp in the FabFilter Saturn plugin. I love this preset, and just added some compression, EQ, cutting out a lot of the lows, a lot of the highs, and we get this. Just sounded so beautiful, and I'd actually experimented with layering this sound, so you'll hear it now with this lead, but I kind of decided against it. You let me know what you think. Because I just love this melody so much, I just wanted to accent it and layer it, and oftentimes it's how you can just imagine taking a letter and making it bold. When it's bold, it's more accentuated and full and in your face, and the way you can do that if you have, whether it's a drum sound or a melody, is just to copy and paste it onto another track that complements and just helps thicken that sound. That's how I visualize it. But yeah, I did decide against it. I think it was enough on its own and just had that, again, beautiful melody. really, really cool layer. And then we hear the guitars come in. I've really become a bit obsessed with electric guitars recently in my tracks. I just think it adds such a cool blend of genres and sounds, because we don't really hear a lot of electric guitars in modern sample making and beats and certain guitar type of beats. But like, I just think like guitar solos is just something I found really refreshing recently. And so I got this from Splice, and I just did a bunch of different chops. And on this second layer, which you're going to hear in the next section, it's the same instrument, but just different chops taken, and with just a bit more effects on it. Like this next section, you'll hear a lot more delay on it, but the guitar just sounded like this. And so that next layer that I played, which I showed you earlier, now has a lot more high end in it. It was really not a battle, but just making sure both these sounds could sit together, because they're both in that high end. This guitar is a bit more in the like high mids, whereas the synth arpeggio is going crazy in the high end. So I even sidechained these two here just using the EQ, so it would just help duck and let that guitar sit nicer in the mix. So you can see here I've boosted where I've ducked here. So really a lot of the times I find when it comes to mixing, it's really a case of using something like an EQ or a multi-band compressor. And then if you have two sounds in a similar frequency range, then boosting one and ducking the other. This is often how you're going to create room for one and just space for the other. So that's how I ended up layering those two together, because they were in that similar frequency range. And then now moving into the next section, and then this is where we have a really cool switch up in like sort of a bridge section, and it sounds like this. Probably one of the weirdest sections or most interesting experimental sections I've done in one of my samples. Obviously now we've got this hi-hat which just adds this kind of dancey rhythm to it, and especially coupled with that Jersey club beat, it's just such high energy. And so this hi-hat without any processing sounded like this. So just a cool kind of like techno upbeat hat. And then so the main difference you can hear is a little bit of this halftime effect, gives it more body. And then I've got a bunch of reverb, and I'm cutting out almost all the lows and even mids. So it's just really contained to that high end, which helps create space for the other instruments that are in that sort of mid-range, and especially the kick that's super in the low end, the hi-hat super in the high end. So just kind of this contrasting rhythm. So they sit on top of each other very nicely. And then the main difference is now I've taken that same bass, and honestly, I did not change this. I did one take where I just like was recording this like groovy bass rhythm I heard in my head, and I just stuck with it. Like you can see it's super kind of off the grid, very imperfect, but every time I was listening back to it, it sounded fine to me. And this is one thing to note, which I've said a lot to my students, is when you're mixing, you don't always want to just be soloing each track when you're mixing, because you can't hear it in its full context. And when I was listening to this in the context of the song, I didn't really notice those imperfections, you know, coming across in a jarring way. It fit well, it sounded fine. So anyway, this is what I played. So So it's really kind of just, yeah, I was going kind of crazy on the keyboard there. It was so much fun. And then again, we've got the guitar that I just said in the last section. This is just duplicated, and I've also panned both these guitars to different sides, so just creating more space and just making it a bit more interesting in terms of the stereo field and where sounds are. And this one just has more delay, so it's just a lot of delay. Oh, and this just like reversed guitar chop just sounds so beautiful to me. So don't be afraid to take sounds that you wouldn't imagine reversing. I think reversing is such a simple trick to do in producing. Reversing sounds is such a simple trick in music production, but you get some of the coolest, interesting sonics by especially even taking sounds you wouldn't usually expect to reverse, especially when most of the other ones aren't reversed within that same track. But yeah, just experiment. Don't be afraid to try things. And this is that same multi-keys preset from the beginning, but it just sounds like this now, where I've done a bunch of chops, reversed it. So this was the original MIDI, but obviously you can see in terms of the audio file, I've just chopped and repeated like the same small little parts. And then we have this second guitar that comes in. So in context, they sound like this. So really lush textures, and this guitar especially just gives me this like 80s, 90s, like really washed out, like nostalgic sound. And again, it's just something you don't really hear in a lot of modern samples, and I just like to experiment. It sounded good to me. Obviously a lot of reverb on this, you can see here. And one effect that I actually experimented with here was this modulation delay. So this added a cool effect, because without, sounds a lot closer, and then with, so really makes it a lot spacier. And I think I'm gonna play around with this plugin a lot more. This is just the stock Logic plugin for modulation delay, and yeah, really, really cool. So trying to also mess around with new plugins is a great way to grow as a producer, and then coupled with the vocal from earlier, but just with a fade. So just bringing back a melodic component from earlier, so there's a bit more cohesion. It's not just one section with a set of sounds to a completely different set of sounds, a completely different set of sounds. We're bringing back elements from previously just to create this kind of, you know, again, cohesion. There's a bit more glue in terms of arrangement. And then moving on towards the outro. And also when you hear this outro, I'm gonna let it loop to the beginning just really quick, because you have to hear how nicely it loops, honestly. So that was just basically the intro, but without the leads, and it just loops back so perfectly. Kind of unintentional, but it worked out really well in terms of arrangement. So funnily enough, this was a sample that I spent a lot of time on, and more than I probably should have, but that's just how it goes sometimes. So don't get frustrated with yourself when, you know, you're almost banging your head trying to get the right sounds to fit, or you find two amazing sounds but they just don't seem to complement each other. It's a lot of trial and error in music production, and with time, getting the reps in and not fixating on those minor details, but focusing on the bigger picture of skill and getting through projects, you'll get better at sound selection and quicker at decision making. And it's funny how many layers I ended up not including in this, because I would be able to throw the sound in, try it, okay, no, it doesn't sit, next, and so on and so forth, until I just found the pieces that I thought sounded good together. And keyword that I thought sounded good together, you're gonna have a different taste and an idea of what sounds complement each other. So don't be afraid to own that. You have your own original voice. You don't need to completely imitate a different producer. Take inspiration and then find your own lane and your own voice. And you're gonna do that by repetition and getting through projects and creating your own sound with time. So yeah, I just wanna reiterate, if you wanna work with me one-on-one and work on whatever you're trying to produce and improve in your music production, again, whether it's the mixing, mastering, the composition, the arrangement, the social media side of things, networking with producers, whatever your goals are, book a free call down below. We'll discuss them and see how I can help you progress much faster as a music producer. And now if you want to watch me break down a darker, more textured sample with a lot of different layers, you can watch this video right here. I had so much fun making this one. And until then, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.